Welcome everybody to the question and answer session, Writing with Fire. My name is Meganthrie Pillay, and I will be your moderator today at the Encounters International Film Festival. We are so honored to have the filmmaker team, Rintu Thomas and Sushmit Ghosh. I hope I said your names correctly. Welcome and thank you so much for an absolutely inspirational film. I believe this is also your debut feature film. That's pretty exciting as well. Tell us a little bit about when you started this journey and what inspired you. How did you even find this story?
Thank you, Meganthrie, and thank you so much for having us here. We found the story completely what I would call through serendipity on the internet. We saw a photo story and followed it to get to know about Khabar Lahariya and their work. And one of the first meetings that we attended with the entire team was the scene that you see in the film where Mira's making the pitch for them to transition from print to digital. And that's the first time we rolled our cameras for this film. And in every film there comes a moment when you know that this is a story I want to tell, and that was it. We couldn't step away from it. We just, I think, plunged headways into 5 years of spending with the story.
Wow. How did you find, because, I mean, yes, there's the internet, and so people watch a lot of video, but how did you find, how open were they to you following their journey and their processes?
They'd been used to films being made on them. There were a lot of short films for which people had shown interest and done. So they were pretty used to that idea. But a film crew that has no timeline was a first.
No deadline.
And that was the interest in them, where they was like, why do you want to make this film? Why do you want to spend so much time? And the interesting thing that happened was, as we began filming is also when they were figuring out the dynamics of being in front of the camera and behind the camera. And so we could have a lot of informed discussions around why we want to make the film, what is our idea of representation and consent. And so I think a lot of honest conversations right at the beginning set us off on the right track.
So I was curious. I mean, firstly, let me say that this film was so inspiring to me because I've been dreaming of a women's newspaper in South Africa for at least the last 2 decades. So to see these women, create their own newspaper, firstly, wow. And then secondly, transition to digital, second, wow. I mean, it was just such an intriguing view to see their engagement with it. And I think it raises so many issues. I mean, if it was in South Africa, there'd be lots of issue about data. So that was one of the questions I had, is what's the kind of infrastructure? They did get smartphones. I was like, okay, how is all of this happening? But also, what's the data situation there that allows them to engage with the internet and create digital media? Just, can you tell us a little bit about that?
I mean, India is one of the largest countries with mobile phone penetration right now in the world, and it's cheap. All you need to do to be on the internet is have a very basic mobile phone with a SIM, and I think we have amongst the largest populations in the world that is on the internet, and fast growing numbers as well. And I think this was one of the reasons that triggered Khabar Lahariya to shift from print to digital, because they existed as a newspaper for 14 years. And the fact that in 14 years, they had achieved a lot, but it was still very local in that sense, because a physical paper can go just as far and be read by just as many people. And if you go into the demographics, in the regions that Khabar Lahariya operates, typically it is the men who finish their schooling. And so typically it is men who have access to newspapers, not really women. And so there were multiple reasons why we decided to make this change. And it's sort of like turned out, it's been a gold mine for them. I think we could make an entirely different film on the first year of the goof ups that happen with just phones, and how do you film it, video, how do you transfer that data to the Delhi studios, because that's where you need to edit it, connection problems, electricity, all of that. But very soon they smoothened it out. And we would love to have Mira and team exported to South Africa to set up bureaus over there with you guys, because she's
Amazing.
sort of lead the
Hook
change.
us up. Hook us up.
I'm happy to do that. Let's see how it started. And for us as well, we're very curious. How do women, and most of whom have never experienced the internet, how are they
Yes.
actually going to become digital journalists? And in that sense, I would say that our curiosity was also stoked. And the journey in the film is essentially the journey we had with them as well, constantly mirroring them, shadowing them to see how this plays out. And, it became a phenomena by the end of it.
Mm. I loved that moment where it's, I'm not sure, is it Shyam Kali, the woman who had trouble with English? And it just never occurred to me that smartphones, like the actual keys, and and that moment was such like, oh wow. So that was her biggest issue, is the English alphabet. And my daughter reads Korean, so she often used to switch my keyboard to Korean. So obviously you can do that on a cell phone, is switch the keyboard to whatever. But that was just such a beautiful moment where that vulnerability and admitting my issue is actually English and the buttons on this thing. But her whole journey was just, so many people are in that position. The digital divide is real. Literacy, we cannot take for granted either. So it just raises so many issues. I just absolutely loved her journey, and also seeing how she progressed and how she triumphed in the end. One of the things that also I think you can't, I'm glad you included it, is the tension between the husbands and the wives in terms of their choices to work and not to work. But also the fact that they spoke about it. And in some cases, where there was abuse, how did you all negotiate talking about their intimate lives and not just their professional lives?
I think that's one of the first conversations that we had. We said that, yes, it's about the newspaper, and we could see a very clear arc right at the beginning, the transition, and then where does this reach in the next, what that felt at that moment was 2 years, 3 years. And what would that journey look like, and success or not? What would it take for them to make this shift? But what we were truly interested in were the women. Who are these women who belong to a community that's consistently brutally silenced and invisibilized for centuries, and now reclaiming spaces that are designed to keep them out? When they reimagine a future, what does that look like? And we were experienced, and it's hard work. Change is such a you need to be invested in the mechanism so badly, that because you don't see an end, right? You don't see change happen overnight, and it's just consistent. And we had conversations where we said we want to know who you are. And the biggest, I think, battles and the toughest ones are conversations, difficult conversations that are had at home. So while we might do great things professionally, it's really the conversations at home and which are the most toughest. And we were really keen to know, as a mother, what is Meera? How is she raising two young girls? What are the conversations that she's having with them? When she disagrees with her husband, what is the language in which she frames that argument? And we spent a lot of time with the entire family for them to get comfortable with us. We used to hang out, watch cricket matches, just spend a lot of time without any specific agenda or the camera rolling. So it's when they got comfortable with us and our presence that we sort of began being more present in more intimate spaces. So I think in a way, it felt like they were having these conversations with like friends around who were not judging them. We understood this power dynamic that exists within a traditional family, and the woman stepping out and having a voice, having a financial independence has a bearing on shifting of those power dynamics. And that is something that we were really interested in. And we felt that that would find a resonance when an audience watches it anywhere in the world. These are universal conversations that a family has.
I mean, we've talked about them as women, but the reality is their status as Dalit women, their status as a caste that is seen at the bottom of the barrel, as it were, and their own personal sense of dignity and their own personal awareness, their pride in themselves as humans. That is what will ultimately create some change, is seeing them, and I loved that you, as you crafted this, you see how corporations, how, the police, how different systems oppress their communities, but them as individuals. I love how clear they're just clear about what they need to do. I just love the way they engage the world. But that scene with Sunita at the mines, that was pretty scary. And I was wondering, did you also have security? Like, that was a question that went through my mind. That scene where they were where she was engaging them and asking them to talk to her. What kind of security? Did you go around with security as well? Was it just the two of you?
It was essentially the three of us. So Rintu and I doubled up as directors on the shoot, and Karan and I were doubling up as cinematographers. And in the first 5 days of filming, we realized that we couldn't come in with those grand plans of having a big crew and the ideal equipment to do something like this, because the physicality of the work that these journalists were doing and the spaces that they were operating in meant that we had to really strip down to the bare minimum. And in that sense, that had a profound impact on the equipment that we chose to film with, the sound recording devices that we chose. There were no boom mics. Rintu doubled up as a sound recordist, much to chagrin as well. But it was what it was, and so the idea also was, how do you blend yourself as storytellers within the environment, especially when you're working in hostile spaces. And I think that one of the things that we learned very early on was that the journalists that covered Leheria, these women, while caste and gender go completely against them in the regions that they are operating, and these are regions that are notorious for violence against Dalits as well as violence against women, these journalists have found spectacular ways of negotiating the system. And so while we were filming in these illegal mines, there was the mining mafia that was around, we were filming in police stations, we were filming with politicians who would not necessarily have given access to a bigger crew, right? So the idea was, how do we film this story without really standing out like a sore thumb? And I think that the first 5 or 6 days of filming really set the trend for us. So we went in with DSLRs, We were always miking up our protagonists with RF mics. And typically how we decided to shoot was Karan and Rintu would be one crew following one journalist, and I would follow another journalist. And, we'd spend a day with them on the ground and come back in the evening, compare notes, plan for the next day, hit the ground running. And so, spend, and filming over 5 years, we spent anywhere between, say, 7 to 20 days on the ground at a time. And that allowed us to sort of film them over a period of time through a change of seasons, seeing a distinction in the kind of cases that they were dealing with, also seeing the kind of impact that their stories were having on ground. All of this in the backdrop of a very fast changing nation and its politics, which allowed us to, in a sense, also capture sort of like a moment of transition in India's history, which Mira has thoughts on towards the end of the film. So, in a sense, this story also became a witness for what was happening, not only within Khabar Lahariya, but within our nation as well.
What I loved as well is visually, you saw the women. There's the one woman and there's the sea of men. That was a consistent theme without saying, oh, look at this woman having to go up against patriarchy or what, the systems at play. Just visually, that was continually reinforced. But there they were with their cameras, holding their position, getting the story. I loved how that was such an integral part actually throughout, is without having to, even they did mention it every now and again, but more than that, you could see it. You could see what they were up against. Yeah, and you talked about serendipity. That I would have to say you couldn't plan for that. So the gods of documentary were with you, clearly. The pantheon. Being in India, of course, it would have to be a pantheon. Isn't that a great idea, though, as documentary filmmakers, if we remember that we have pantheons of documentary gods with us?
And especially on days that it feels like nothing's happening, and is this even going to make its way into the overall film? There were several of those moments which I am now in the film. So in isolation on that very day, when you're still just stuck in the moment, and 2 years later when you see that as footage, it's just amazing how the perspective completely changes. And editing this film has been a journey of discoveries. And a lot of things that we used to continually edit while filming, just to be sure about, have we got this? Are we imagining that we've got this? So we were always on top of that. But when we're putting together the assembly is when a lot of gems really popped up. And that's where I think the pantheon sort of totally made its presence felt.
Definitely. One of the core themes is this notion of democracy. And as journalists, is who gets to tell what story. That is obviously a core in terms of Khabar Lahariya. And it just, unravels what it could mean if the means to tell these stories were in ordinary people's hands. So that's such an important theme. What were some of the core questions? Because I think while making a documentary of this nature, you could go in so many directions. What were some of the core questions that guided you as filmmakers in crafting the story?
There was just so much that we wanted to sort of pump into 90 minutes. Our first assembly was about 4.5 hours. And and the fact is that we knew that this was a story that was highly intersectional. You're talking about gender, you're talking about journalism, democracy, media, free speech, and just the position of Dalit women, because in pop culture in India, Dalit women typically have had the portrayal has typically been of victim stories, where the bodies of Dalit women are sites of violence. But very rarely do you see a Dalit woman who is creating systemic change. And I think that that was something that was really important for us and a guiding principle. How do we talk about the work that these journalists are doing and not just limited to the world of journalism? Because this is really radical stuff if you think about it, because they're essentially inverting almost 3,000 years of caste hierarchy by doing what they're doing. The fact that these women are not only stepping out of their homes into danger, but stepping out of their homes with the values and principles of ensuring equity and justice for all citizens and not just the Dalit community was something that really principally drove the edit for us as well. Because if you take away the fact that they're journalists, they could be doctors, they could be teachers and be doing the same thing. And I think that that was the guiding force for us. How do we bring forth the personalities of Meera, Sunita, and Shamkali? And in that sense, do these three women really embody the spirit of the newspaper? And in that sense, does this newspaper really shine a light on what digital news can do in spaces like India and across the world? Because, over the past 5 years, or I would say 5 or 7 years, with big data companies becoming bigger, there has also been the rise of the far right and authoritarian regimes across the planet.
Absolutely.
And the fact is that you have citizens like Meera who are working as professional journalists, speaking truth to power, irrespective of the consequences, but doing it in the smartest, most proficient, and sophisticated manner. Can this story then become a model story for the world? And how do you ensure that you are not complicating something that is simple and not oversimplifying something that is complex? Because themes of caste and gender cannot be addressed in a 90-minute film, but they can be presented on the table to lead to more discussion. So topically, these are the things that we were constantly debating while we were on the edit.
Okay, because I mean, there's, I think even the stories of rape, I mean, at the heart of it, you didn't run away from their status in society and how they're treated. And I think that was important as well in highlighting how those other women, despite all of that, were able to find steps, to find ways to use their voices, to learn technology, which I think we cannot underestimate the divide. Certainly, I know in Africa, in South Africa, it's so huge. And on top of that, we have data issues. So not just devices, but data is such a big issue. But seeing these women with that courage, just going out, pursuing the truth, trying to get to it, learning how to, not just report on stories, but critically report on stories. I mean, Meera was just, wow. She was just so beautiful. Her whole journey, how she worked with the other women, how she supported the other women. She was never condescending. As she said all the things that she'd studied, and even myself, I'm like, oh my God, it's such an inspiration to continue studying and to also, tell how, the beginnings, when she got married at 14, all of it was, it's just like mind-boggling for many people. And despite all of this, here she is, someone who's so personable, so engaging, and so committed and dedicated. Yeah, very, very exciting protagonist. And of course, Sunita was an absolute, I think we all felt heartbroken when she decided to get married. Because on the one hand, you have to admire that she, would give everything up for her family to protect her family, but it was pretty heartbreaking. So I'm glad she got back to doing that. I think we can say that this story is nothing short of being revolutionary. I mean, there's almost no other word to use for it, because of all the ways in which the work of the women, but this film itself, I think, is hopefully going to inspire people everywhere. And seriously, I do believe it can actually become a movement. So those women should get ready for taking communities. I know they have their work cut out in India, but they all are beginning working on their passports. So definitely the world is waiting. What were some of the most challenging moments that you experienced while filming and editing?
I think we had an idea of where the story would go with the newspaper, and we were going deep into each of the characters' lives. Um, but I think the biggest challenge was to bring it all together, to weave it into a seamless, cohesive piece. So. And we didn't want to get stuck in the act one, act two, act three kind of, compartmentalized way of telling the story, because it's much more fluid than that. We wanted to spend time with each character to understand her personality, her personal history, the force of nature, and three of them were so different from each other, different stages in their lives. And then to then also have the story of the newspaper and story of the country, and then coming in, I think that is where the biggest challenge was. To be because they were journalists, there was just so much happening. There were so many cases that would take up their attention and our filming attention on an everyday basis. We would do about 7 to 14 days schedules spread across months for 4 years. So it just felt like, everything feels important from when you're on the ground. But to really, we really wanted to have the individual story, and because the individual is a part of the society that she's reporting about, the idea was to link the story with something to do with her personal story, and that took like a lot of fine tuning. We spent a lot of time with the footage and those sticky notes, and agreeing and disagreeing. So the 1 year we took out to edit the film was the hardest. There were times when we just felt like everything is going up in flames and this thing is never going to make sense. But we worked with Anne Fabini, the German director, editor, and she really helped us look at every scene as a story and be really strict with us and say, this is extra.
As a scene.
This is
Interesting.
the story. And to have an external person to discuss things who has no personal connection to the story,
Yes.
is super, super useful, because we've got.
Oh, but that was such a hard shot to get. Do you understand? I have to have it in. Wonderful. Thank you so very much. I really enjoyed the film. I will definitely be recommending it. And I am serious about the linkages globally for different communities who need to find a way to use their voices. So I really think this film is going to make waves on a number of fronts. Thank you so much for
here with a little bit where Khabar Lahariya actually has used the pandemic as a time to develop like a series of online modules around journalism. Yeah, by Sunita, who's basically the master instructor. And hopefully later this year or earlier next year, these modules should be available online. And their plan is actually to expand pan-India, and possibly we're hoping that maybe the film would be able to find linkages for them in geographies across the world, because it's some fantastic stuff that's in the pipeline. So that's going to happen.
Okay. That's even more exciting. That's really fantastic. Lovely. Any final closing thoughts, closing words you'd like to share with us?
I think we're very excited that the film has come to encounters and a brand new audience is able to experience it. It's been on the North American side all this while. This is a completely, and there's so many things between our cultures that are common. And we can't wait to hear what the audience at Encounters really comes out of the film with. And it's just such a pleasure to talk to you about it.
Thank you both so much. Rintu and Sushmit, thank you so much. With Writing with Fire. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.